I always knew my family would try to steal my inheritance. I just never expected my older brother to hand me the evidence of his own felony on a silver platter. Last Sunday, he kicked open the door of my grandfather's historic Atlanta home, slammed a forged deed onto the kitchen island, and grinning like he had just won the lottery, told me I had exactly 4 days to pack my bags. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just took a slow sip of my coffee, watched his entitled wife measure my living room for new drapes, and smiled. They thought they were evicting me, but they had just walked straight into an ironclad federal trap. The morning started with the kind of peace you only find in the historic neighborhoods of Atlanta before the heavy heat of the day sets in. I was sitting at the massive kitchen island of the beautiful Victorian home my granddad Elijah had poured his heart and soul into. The house smelled like dark roast coffee and the lemon oil I used on the original hardwood floors just the day before. As a certified public accountant, my weekdays were a relentless blur of numbers, client meetings, and financial statements. So these quiet Sunday mornings were my absolute sanctuary. I had my laptop open, reviewing some tax updates for my firm, wearing my most comfortable sweatpants, completely at ease in the home that had been my safe haven since I was a little girl. Granddad Elijah had been the only person in my family who saw me for who I really was. I saw the daughter who worked herself to the bone to build a career while the rest of the family fawned over the son who could not even hold down a job. That peace was shattered instantly. The heavy oak front door did not just open. It was shoved inward with such force that the brass handle banged violently against the entryway wall. I did not even have time to stand up before they marched into my kitchen. My older brother Jamal led the pack, walking with that familiar, unearned swagger he had carried since childhood. Right behind him was our mother Yvonne, wearing her Sunday church clothes and a look of absolute entitlement. Bringing up the rear was Jamal's wife, Brittany. Brittany was a white woman who had always treated me like the hired help rather than her sister-in-law, and today was clearly no exception. She did not even bother to look in my direction or say hello. She just walked past the kitchen, pulled a digital laser measure from her designer purse, and immediately pointed the red beam at my custom living room windows, muttering to herself about needing extra wide panels for the velvet curtains she planned to buy. I closed my laptop slowly, making sure my face revealed absolutely nothing. I had spent 35 years dealing with this exact family dynamic. In our household, Jamal was the undisputed king, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the designated scapegoat expected to yield sacrifice and ultimately finance his endless mistakes. Jamal did not offer a greeting. He walked straight up to the kitchen island, pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, and slapped it down on the marble surface right next to my coffee mug. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet kitchen. He leaned forward, resting his palms on the counter, flashing a grin that made my stomach turn. "We had the house signed into my name," he announced, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You have until Thursday to pack up your things and get out." I looked down at the piece of paper. It was a property deed, specifically a quitclaim deed purporting to transfer ownership of Granddad Elijah's historic Atlanta property directly to Jamal. I am an accountant. I deal with legal documents, asset transfers, and financial records all day long. It took me less than 3 seconds to spot the glaring, undeniable issues with the document lying in front of me. The formatting was sloppy, likely downloaded from some cheap online legal template. But more importantly, the signature at the bottom, supposedly belonging to my late grandfather, was an absolute forgery. It was a decent attempt at copying the loops of his handwriting, but the pressure and spacing were all wrong. Not to mention, Granddad Elijah had been dead for months. I kept my hands resting calmly on my lap. I did not touch the paper. I looked from the forged document up to Jamal's smug face and then over to my mother. Yvonne was standing by the refrigerator, looking completely unbothered by the fact that her son had just proudly presented a fraudulent legal document to steal her daughter's inheritance. In fact, she looked immensely proud of him. "Stop looking so dramatic, Chloe," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively before I had even spoken a single word. "This is how things are supposed to be. Jamal is the man of the family now that your grandfather is gone. He has a wife to think about, a family to provide for. You are a single woman. You do not need a house this big. It is time for you to stop being selfish and let your brother step into his rightful place as the head of this family." I took a slow breath, letting her words wash over me. Stop being selfish. That had been her mantra for my entire life. When Jamal wrecked his car in high school, I was told to be unselfish and give him my savings so he could buy a new one. When I got accepted to a top-tier university, I was told to be unselfish and attend a cheaper community college because Jamal needed help paying off his massive credit card debt. I had spent my entire life shrinking myself so Jamal could feel big. And now they expected me to simply hand over a property worth nearly $750,000 because Jamal felt entitled to it. Over in the living room, a loud beep echoed as Brittany locked in a measurement. Honestly, Jamal Brittany called out without even turning around to face us. We need to tear out these original hardwood floors. They are completely outdated. I want wide plank gray oak in here before we move the furniture in next weekend. Tell her to make sure the place is broom swept when she leaves. I am not dealing with her dust. The sheer audacity of the scene playing out in my kitchen was almost suffocating. My brother had committed a felony. My mother was cheering him on. And his wife was already planning to rip out the historic floors my grandfather had painstakingly restored by hand. They had walked into my sanctuary, violated my peace, and expected me to crumble just like I always had when we were children. They expected the quiet, accommodating Chloe who would swallow her anger to keep the peace. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a 35-year-old woman who knew exactly what the law said, and more importantly, I knew exactly what I held in my arsenal. The cultural script my mother was trying to enforce was a heavy burden that many women in my community know all too well, the expectation that the capable, independent daughter must constantly lay her achievements at the feet of the struggling son. Yvonne honestly believed that because Jamal had managed to convince a woman to marry him, he had somehow achieved a status that overshadowed my years of hard work, my degrees, and the deep bond I had shared with the man who actually owned this home. My mother saw my independence not as an accomplishment, but as a resource to be harvested for Jamal's benefit. I picked up my coffee mug, taking a deliberate, unhurried sip. The dark roast tasted particularly good this morning. I set the mug down, folded my hands on the table, and looked Jamal dead in the eyes. I let a slow, calm smile spread across my face. "You really think I would let that happen?" I asked, my voice low and completely steady. Jamal scoffed, throwing his head back in a loud, mocking laugh. "It is not about what you let happen, Chloe. The paperwork is done. The house is mine. You have 4 days. Do not make me call the sheriff to have you forcibly removed. It would be embarrassing for you to be dragged out of here in front of the neighbors." My mother sighed heavily, walking toward the front door. "Do not be difficult about this, Chloe. We are going out for brunch to celebrate Jamal and Brittany's new home. I suggest you use this time to start packing your things. We will check in on your progress later. Come along, Brittany. Let us leave your sister-in-law to her boxes." Brittany dropped the laser measure into her purse with a satisfied click. "Thursday, Chloe," she said, finally looking at me with a cold, triumphant smirk. "Do not leave a mess." I watched the three of them walk out the front door, leaving it standing wide open behind them. I listened to the sound of Jamal's truck engine roar to life, the tires crunching against the gravel of the driveway as they pulled away to celebrate their imaginary victory over avocado toast and mimosas. I waited until the sound of the engine completely faded down the street. I stood up from the kitchen island, walked over to the front door and pushed it shut, sliding the heavy deadbolt into place with a satisfying thud. The house was quiet again, the peace returning just as quickly as it had been broken. I walked back to this kitchen and looked down at the forged quit-claim deed Jamal had left behind. He had actually put it in writing. He had physically handed me the evidence of his own crime. I did not feel fear. I did not feel panic. I felt a cold, sharp sense of anticipation. Granddad Elijah had warned me this would happen. He knew exactly what Yvonne and Jamal were capable of, and he had made sure I was armed and ready for the day they finally tried to strike. He had seen the greed simmering beneath their fake smiles at family gatherings, and he had taken every legal precaution to ensure my future was protected from their entitlement. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I had saved 6 months ago right after Granddad's funeral. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear, listening to it ring twice before a deep professional voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "It is Chloe. You were absolutely right. They took the bait. Jamal just handed me a forged deed and told me I have until Thursday to vacate the property." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low, knowing chuckle from my attorney. "I see," Elias Thorne replied, his voice projecting the calm certainty of a man who handled multi-million-dollar legal battles before his morning coffee. "And I assume you did not mention the current ownership status of the estate." I did not tell them a thing, I said, looking around my beautiful kitchen, tracing the grain of the marble countertop with my fingertip. "Let us prep the filings. They want a moving day on Thursday. Let us make sure they get a show they will never forget." Monday morning arrived with the crisp, organized efficiency I had built my entire adult life around. As a certified public accountant, the first few hours of my work week were strictly dedicated to reviewing client portfolios, examining financial statements, and finalizing tax strategies. I was sitting at my sleek desk in my downtown Atlanta office watching the city wake up through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had always loved the predictable rhythm of numbers. Math did not lie. Math did not hold double standards based on gender or birth order. Math certainly did not expect you to set yourself on fire just to keep an entitled older brother warm. I took a sip of my black coffee, relishing the quiet control I had over my environment. At exactly 9:15, my phone vibrated against the desktop. Then it vibrated again and again. Within 30 seconds, the device was dancing across my desk in a continuous spasm of notifications. I did not even need to look at the screen to know exactly what was happening. My mother, Yvonne, had officially sounded the alarm. I picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and opened our extended family group chat. The chat was ironically titled Family First, a name that tasted like absolute ash in my mouth, given the staggering volume of betrayal I was currently scrolling through. My mother had struck first, delivering a masterful digital performance of manufactured victimhood. Her opening message was a massive block of text detailing how utterly heartbroken she was over my supposed cruelty. She told the entire extended family that Jamal had legitimately acquired the deed to our late grandfather's house and that I was maliciously refusing to leave the property. She painted a vivid fictional picture of Jamal as a hardworking family man who was desperately trying to provide a stable home for his new wife, while his selfish, ungrateful sister squatted in a property that rightfully belonged to him. It was a spectacular piece of creative writing, completely ignoring the fact that her precious son had forged a signature on a fake deed. The responses from my relatives poured in like a synchronized chorus of eager enablers. Aunt Valerie, my mother's older sister, was the very first to chime in. She typed that she was praying for my bitter heart to be softened. She actually used the phrase bitter heart. She went on to declare that a single woman of my age had no business taking up that much space in a historic home when a married man needed a foundation to build his legacy. She reminded the group chat that women in our family were supposed to be nurturing and accommodating, not greedy and combative. Then came cousin Malek, who had borrowed $3,000 from me 2 years ago to start a clothing brand that never materialized and conveniently forgot to pay me back. He chimed in to say that I had always been jealous of Jamal because he had managed to find a spouse while I was stubbornly married to my career. Malik typed that I needed to stop acting like an angry spinster and step aside so the real head of the household could claim his territory. The notifications kept cascading down my screen, each one a heavier dose of toxic family dynamics than the last. They called me a jealous spinster. They accused me of trying to steal my brother's joy. They demanded I pack my bags and apologize to Jamal and his wife for being so incredibly uncooperative. Reading those messages, I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of the expectations placed on successful Black women in families like mine. We are expected to be the mules of the family, carrying everyone else's burdens without a single complaint or moment of hesitation. When we succeed, our success is treated as a community resource to be divided up and handed out to whoever screams the loudest. Jamal had never worked a solid 40-hour week in his entire life. He had never saved a dime or paid a bill on time. Yet because he was the eldest son, his desires were treated as divine rights. And because I was the independent daughter, my hard-earned boundaries were treated as acts of aggressive warfare. They honestly believed that if they shamed me enough, if they threw enough guilt and intense religious manipulation my way, I would eventually break. They expected me to type out a tearful apology, beg for their forgiveness, and hand over the keys to a $750,000 estate just to be allowed back into their good graces. For decades, that tactic had worked perfectly. When we were children, if Jamal broke a window, I was punished for not watching him closely enough. If Jamal failed a class, I was scolded for not tutoring him better. The family group chat was just a modern digital continuation of the exact same abuse I had endured since childhood. But they were dealing with a woman who had spent her entire career documenting liabilities and mitigating severe financial risks. I did not type a single word in response. I did not aggressively defend myself. I did not explain that Jamal's deed was a blatant, sloppy forgery, or that the house actually belonged to an irrevocable trust managed by my attorney. I did not tell them that they were currently cheering on a man who had committed a massive felony. Instead, I sat back in my quiet, air-conditioned office, took a deep breath, and started taking screenshots. I captured every single message, every cruel accusation, every admission of complicity from my mother and my extended family. I watched them construct a meticulous digital public record of their own harassment. They were freely providing me with documented evidence of a coordinated, targeted effort to force me out of a property using a fraudulent document. My trust attorney, Elias Thorne, had explicitly told me to let them talk to give them enough rope to hang themselves, and my family was giving me a masterclass in self-incrimination. The group chat buzzed again this time with a message directly from Jamal. It was a photo of a moving truck rental confirmation with a smug caption that read, "Thursday is coming fast, little sister. Hope you have plenty of boxes." My mother immediately responded with clapping hands emojis and a message praising him for taking charge of his household. I took another screenshot, saving it to a secure, encrypted folder on my cloud drive. Every time my phone vibrated, I felt a cold, sharp sense of satisfaction. They thought my silence meant I was retreating. They interpreted my lack of response as submission, assuming I was sitting in my office crying over their cruel words and frantically figuring out how to pack my belongings. They had absolutely no idea that my silence was not defeat. It was an ambush in the making. I was securing the perimeter of the trap they had so willingly walked right into. I carefully reviewed the screenshots, ensuring I had captured the timestamps and the phone numbers associated with each message. As a certified public accountant, I knew that establishing a clear timeline was crucial in any fraud investigation. The fact that my mother was actively participating in a group chat pressuring me to honor a forged real estate document made her a potential accessory to the crime. By weaponizing the family against me, she had inadvertently tied herself to Jamal's sinking ship. I placed my phone face down on the glass desk, intentionally muting the ongoing barrage of notifications. The extended family could spend the rest of the day spinning their fictional narratives and patting Jamal on the back. Their words no longer had the power to wound me. The little girl who used to cry in her room when her mother chose her brother over her was gone. In her place was a financially literate, legally protected woman who was about to deliver a reality check they would never recover from. I turned my attention back to my laptop screen, refocusing on the complex tax documents I needed to finalize for a client. The contrast between my productive, legitimate professional life and my family's chaotic criminal behavior had never been more apparent. I was building genuine wealth and security while they were playing pretend with stolen assets. The countdown to Thursday was officially ticking, and I was more than ready for the inevitable, devastating collision. Just as I finished saving my client files, a new notification popped up on my computer screen, syncing from my home security system, motion detected at the front porch. I checked the time. It was barely noon. My mother and Jamal were supposed to be at work, and the moving truck was not scheduled until Thursday. I clicked open the live camera feed and leaned closer to the high-resolution screen, my eyes narrowing at the live footage playing out on my monitor. The digital group chat war was apparently not enough for them. The harassment was moving from the virtual world directly to my front doorstep. I watched the high-definition camera feed with intense focus, perfectly preparing for the next layer of their ridiculous assault. The battle was escalating faster than I had anticipated, and I was completely ready. I slowly leaned back in my leather chair, determined to let them make the very first move. The digital feed on my monitor was crystal clear. Standing on my historic wraparound porch was Brittany, wearing a pristine white tennis skirt and oversized designer sunglasses. Beside her stood a woman I did not recognize, holding a thick binder of fabric swatches and an expensive-looking tablet. Brittany was aggressively rattling my front door handle, her face contorted in frustration when the mechanism refused to budge. I had changed the locks the very day Granddad Elijah passed away, anticipating that my mother would eventually hand her spare key over to Jamal. Brittany yanked the handle one more time before throwing her hands up in an exaggerated display of annoyance. I turned up the volume on my computer speakers. Brittany's shrill voice filtered through the high-definition audio feed. "I cannot believe she actually locked us out," Brittany complained to the interior designer. Jamal told her she has to be gone by Thursday, but she is being incredibly stubborn and hostile. We are going to have to fumigate this place once she finally leaves. The interior designer shifted uncomfortably on her feet, looking around the porch. I sat in my office, staring at the screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute clarity wash over me. Brittany was standing on my property, making plans to erase my grandfather's legacy, while casually calling me hostile. It was the same loaded language she had used against me for years. Whenever I set a boundary, I was aggressive. Whenever I declined to finance Jamal's mistakes, I was uncooperative. Brittany had perfected the art of weaponizing her fragility against my independence, and today she had brought an audience to watch her perform. I leaned forward and pressed the microphone icon on my security application. My voice projected clearly through the two-way speaker on the porch. "Can I help you, Brittany?" Brittany jumped back, dropping her designer purse onto the wooden deck. She stared wildly at the doorbell camera before her shock quickly morphed into blazing indignation. "Chloe," she snapped, stepping right up to the camera lens. "Open this door immediately. I have a consultation scheduled with my designer and we need to measure the master bedroom." Jamal said, "This house is ours now. You have no right to lock me out of my own property." I took a slow breath, keeping my voice perfectly modulated and calm. "I will not be opening the door, Brittany, because you do not own this property. You are currently trespassing. I strongly suggest you and your guests step off my porch before I contact the authorities." Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "You are not going to threaten me, Chloe," she screamed at the small black camera. "You are always so angry and uncooperative. I am not leaving. In fact, I am calling the police right now to have you removed. My husband gave you an eviction notice and you are illegally squatting in our home." I smiled at the monitor. "Please do call them, Brittany," I said smoothly. "In fact, tell them to hurry. I am leaving my office right now and I will be there in 15 minutes to clarify the situation with them in person." I ended the transmission, grabbed my leather handbag, and walked out of my downtown office. The drive to my neighborhood took exactly 14 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime of preparation. I navigated the Atlanta traffic with an eerie sense of calm. For years, I had watched Brittany use her tears and exaggerated fears to manipulate family situations, playing the terrified victim whenever I simply asked to be treated with basic respect. She was banking on the fact that if she called the police and described an angry, hostile black woman refusing to give up a house, the officers would immediately take her side. She was counting on systemic bias to do the dirty work Jamal was too cowardly to do himself. As I turned onto my tree-lined street, the flashing blue lights of an Atlanta police cruiser confirmed she had followed through on her threat. The squad car was parked haphazardly at the curb directly behind Brittany's white luxury SUV. I pulled my car smoothly into the driveway, put it in park, and took one deep centering breath before stepping out into the midday heat. The scene on my front lawn was exactly as I had predicted. Two uniformed police officers were standing near the steps while Brittany frantically paced back and forth, waving her hands in the air. The interior designer had wisely retreated to the sidewalk, looking absolutely mortified to be involved in this chaotic domestic dispute. The moment Brittany saw me, she pointed a manicured finger in my direction. "There she is," she yelled, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "She is the one I called about. She is trespassing in my husband's house, and she threatened me through the security system. She is acting completely erratic, and I feel incredibly unsafe." The two police officers immediately turned toward me, their postures visibly stiffening. They placed their hands near their utility belts, influenced by the frantic, hysterical narrative Brittany was forcefully feeding them. As a 35-year-old African-American woman, I knew exactly how dangerous this specific situation could be. One wrong move, one raised voice, and Brittany's fabricated fears could escalate into a physical nightmare. But I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I smoothed the front of my tailored business suit, held my head high, and walked up my driveway with the calm, measured stride of a professional who was entirely in control of her environment. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, my tone respectful and perfectly modulated. "I understand there seems to be some confusion here. My name is Chloe, and this is my property." Brittany scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. "Do not listen to her," she cried out, shrinking behind the taller officer. "She is lying. My husband Jamal owns this house. He gave her an eviction notice on Sunday because she is an aggressive squatter. She locked us out and refused to let my designer inside. You need to arrest her or force her to leave. She is threatening my safety." The older officer held up a hand to silence Brittany and then looked at me, his expression skeptical. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "we received a call about a hostile individual refusing to vacate a premises. Do you have any proof that you reside at this address?" I maintained steady eye contact with the officer. I reached slowly into my designer handbag, ensuring all my movements were visible and deliberate. "I absolutely do, officer," I replied, pulling out a slim leather wallet. I retrieved my Georgia driver's license and handed it to him. "You will see that my current legal address matches this property exactly. Furthermore, I have this." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my bag and handed it over as well. It was the most recent water and trash utility bill printed on official city letterhead, clearly displaying my full name and the property address. I had specifically grabbed it from my desk before leaving the office, knowing exactly what documentation would shut this circus down. The officer reviewed my license and the utility bill. I watched his posture relax immediately. The tension in his shoulders evaporated as he realized he was not dealing with a hostile squatter, but rather a verified homeowner who was simply trying to enter her own house. He handed the documents back to me with a polite nod. "Thank you, ma'am. Everything appears to be in order." He turned around to face Brittany, who was staring at the exchange with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Ma'am," he addressed Brittany, his tone noticeably firmer. "Now this woman has provided state-issued identification and utility records proving she resides here. Do you have any documentation showing that you or your husband own this property?" Brittany's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked wildly at the designer, who was now pretending to be extremely interested in a nearby oak tree. Well, I do not have it on me," Brittany stammered, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. "Jamal has the deed. He has the paperwork at his office. But I am his wife. We are taking possession of the house on Thursday." The second officer let out a long, exasperated sigh, clearly recognizing that they had been called away from real emergencies to mediate a baseless family dispute. "Ma'am, you cannot call emergency services and demand we remove someone from their verified legal residence just because you claim your husband has paperwork somewhere else," the officer said sharply. "Without a court-ordered eviction notice and proof of ownership signed by a judge, you have zero legal right to be on this property." "But she was threatening me." Brittany tried again, her voice pitching higher in a desperate attempt to regain the victim role. She was aggressive through the camera. "I have full audio and video recordings from the security system saved to my cloud drive," I interjected, smoothly addressing the officers while ignoring Brittany completely. "The footage will confirm I simply asked this individual to stop trying to force entry into my home and advised her she was trespassing. I am happy to provide the files if you need to file a false report charge." The older officer shook his head. "That will not be necessary, ma'am." He turned his full attention to Brittany, pointing a firm finger toward the street. "You and your friend need to pack up your things and leave this property immediately. If you return without a court order, or if we have to come back out here today, you will be arrested for trespassing and filing a false police report. Do I make myself clear?" Brittany looked absolutely devastated. The smug sense of superiority she had carried into my house on Sunday was entirely gone. She stood frozen on my front lawn, completely humiliated in front of the expensive interior designer she had hired to help rip apart my grandfather's legacy. The designer did not even wait for Brittany. She practically sprinted to her car, throwing her fabric swatches into the back seat and speeding away without saying a single word. Brittany glared at me, her chest heaving with silent fury. She had played her best card, attempting to use my race and her tears to forcibly remove me from my own home, and it had failed spectacularly. Without a word, she turned on her heel, marched to her luxury SUV, and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. She peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching, leaving me alone on my property with the two officers. "I apologize for the disruption to your day, officers," I said, offering them a polite nod. "Have a good afternoon, ma'am," the older officer replied, tipping his hat before they returned to their cruiser. I walked up the steps of my porch, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside the cool, quiet hallway of my house. The familiar silence enveloped me, feeling richer and more deeply satisfying than ever before. Brittany had tried to break my perimeter, but she had only succeeded in proving how legally powerless they truly were. The foundation of their grand plan was built on nothing but sheer arrogance and blatant lies. I walked into the sunlit kitchen, poured myself a fresh glass of iced water, and smiled at the beautiful original hardwood floors she had so desperately wanted to destroy. They were getting reckless, and desperate people always made catastrophic mistakes. The real trap had not even been fully sprung yet, and they were already bleeding out in plain sight. I knew Jamal would hear about this humiliation within minutes, and his wounded pride would force him to retaliate in a way that would seal his absolute destruction. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my water, ready for his next move. The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the original hardwood floors of my living room. I sat perfectly still in the quiet of my home, processing the sheer magnitude of Brittany's spectacular failure on my front lawn. I knew my brother Jamal better than he knew himself. In our family dynamic, his ego was a fragile glass house built entirely on a foundation of unearned privilege and our mother's relentless coddling. When Brittany returned to him, humiliated and empty-handed without the keys to the property, he had promised her his wounded pride would demand immediate retaliation. He could never accept being outsmarted by his younger sister, especially not in front of his wife. He would need to prove that he was still the undisputed king of the family, and that meant he was going to make a reckless, impulsive move. I did not have to wait long for him to fall right into my hands. As a certified public accountant, my personal finances were structured like a fortress. Every dollar was tracked, every investment was diversified, and every account was heavily monitored. But there was one single lingering financial thread from my past that I had deliberately left open. It was a basic joint checking account at a local credit union. My mother, Yvonne, had set it up for me over 15 years ago when I was just a freshman moving into my dorm at Spelman College. She insisted on adding Jamal as an authorized user back then, claiming he would act as the man of the house to help manage my emergency book money if I ever needed it. He never contributed a single dime to that account, of course. I had kept the account active all these years simply because the long credit history attached to it boosted my overall credit score. I kept exactly $5,000 parked in there as a minor emergency fund, practically forgetting it existed most days. At exactly 3:00, my phone vibrated against the marble surface of the kitchen island. It was an automated push notification from the credit union application. The screen lit up with a brief glaring message indicating that a withdrawal of $5,000 had just been successfully processed. The account balance had been completely drained down to zero. I stared at the screen, feeling my heart rate slow to a steady, calculated rhythm. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message directly from Jamal. The message read, "Consider this back rent for the last 6 months you have been squatting in my property. Thursday is coming." I sat back on my bar stool, letting the absolute absurdity of his actions wash over me. Jamal thought he was teaching me a lesson. He honestly believed he was putting me in my place, breaking my spirit by hitting my wallet. In his mind, he was cutting off my resources, punishing me for disrespecting his authority, and showing Brittany that he was fully in control of the situation. He assumed I would panic. He expected me to call him crying, begging for my money back, or frantically apologizing for locking them out. He was relying on the old toxic family script where he takes whatever he wants, and I suffer the consequences in silence. But Jamal was not dealing with a scared college student anymore. He was dealing with a licensed financial auditor who investigated corporate embezzlement for a living. Jamal did not understand the first thing about modern banking laws or digital forensic tracking. He did not realize that by using a mobile application to initiate an unauthorized transfer of funds based on a fraudulent claim of property ownership, he had just crossed a massive legal boundary. I did not feel anger. I did not feel the familiar sting of sibling betrayal. I felt a cold, sharp sense of clinical precision. Jamal had just used an interstate electronic banking network to steal $5,000 from my personal account. By explicitly stating in writing that he was taking the money as rent for a property he did not legally own, he had firmly established his criminal intent. He had officially committed federal wire fraud and grand larceny. He thought he was playing a harmless game of family dominance, but he had just gift-wrapped his own prison sentence and handed me the tracking number. My mother had spent her entire life shielding Jamal from the real-world consequences of his actions. Whenever he stole from my piggy bank as a child, she called it borrowing. When he ruined my credit by missing payments on a car loan I had foolishly co-signed in my early 20s, she told me to forgive him because family protects family. She had taught him that taking from me was his birthright. But federal investigators did not care about Yvonne's maternal excuses. The justice system did not care that he was the golden child. The banking regulators only cared about the digital footprint of stolen funds. I picked up my phone and took a clear, high-resolution screenshot of his text message. I then logged into the credit union application and downloaded the official transaction receipt, which clearly displayed the IP address and the exact timestamp of his mobile withdrawal. I exported the documents into a secure encrypted folder on my cloud drive, adding them to the growing digital dossier I was building against him. I was gathering the nails for his coffin, and he was handing them to me one by one. I stood up from the kitchen island and walked into my home office, locking the heavy wooden doors behind me. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across my glass desk. I booted up my primary workstation and logged into my highly secure legal portal. This was not the standard interface I used for everyday client taxes. This was the deep encrypted archive where I stored my most sensitive personal assets. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password and verified my identity through a two-factor authentication process on my phone. The screen loaded, displaying the secure vault. I clicked on the master file labeled The Elijah Trust. Granddad Elijah had been a brilliant man. He grew up in an era where black men had to fight tooth and nail for every single acre of land they owned, and he understood the sacred value of generational wealth. He also possessed a sharp, unforgiving judge of character. He saw right through Jamal's lazy entitlement, and he despised the way my mother enabled it. During the last year of his life, when his health began to fail, he called me into his study and laid out his entire financial portfolio. He told me that the minute he was put in the ground, Yvonne and Jamal would try to strip the estate down to the copper wiring. They were going to tear this house apart, sell it for quick cash, and blow the money on luxury cars and bad investments. He would not allow his life's work to be squandered by a boy who refused to become a man. I sat there gripping the arms of my chair, listening to him articulate the exact fears I had been harboring for years. He knew Yvonne would use her authority as his daughter to hand the entire estate over to Jamal. He knew Jamal would manipulate her into giving him the house, the cash, and the investment portfolios. Granddad Elijah looked me dead in the eyes and told me he had a plan to stop them, but he needed me to execute it flawlessly. He needed me to be completely ruthless because he knew my family would not hesitate to destroy my future. That night, we began the meticulous process of locking down the empire. We brought in Elias Thorne, a highly specialized trust attorney, known for drafting impenetrable legal structures. Granddad Elijah did not want a standard last will and testament. He knew a regular will would go through probate court where Yvonne and Jamal could contest it and drain the estate through endless legal fees. He wanted something that completely bypassed the probate process entirely. He wanted a financial fortress. Under the guidance of Attorney Thorne, we established an irrevocable federal trust. It was a complex, highly secure legal entity designed to hold high-value assets. Over the next few weeks, Granddad Elijah quietly and systematically transferred ownership of everything he had into the trust. We moved the deed to the historic Atlanta house, changing the legal owner from his personal name to the name of the trust. We transferred the entire balance of his savings accounts, his mutual funds, and his life insurance policies. The total value of the estate was precisely $720,000, and every single penny was locked away behind a federal firewall. The most crucial element of the entire operation was the chain of command. Granddad Elijah named me as the sole active trustee. He did not list Yvonne as a beneficiary. He did not leave a single dime to Jamal. He legally handed the absolute keys to the kingdom directly to me. He gave me full, unmitigated executive authority over the property and the funds. Once the transfer was fully complete, his personal net worth on paper dropped to zero. When he passed away, he technically owned nothing, which meant there was absolutely nothing for my mother or my brother to inherit through traditional legal channels. I remember the night the final trust documents were signed and sealed. Granddad Elijah was confined to his bed, too weak to walk down to his study. I sat beside him holding his hand while he reviewed the thick legal binder. He signed the final page with a steady hand, setting the pen down with a deep sigh of relief. He looked up at me and gripped my fingers with surprising strength. "They will try to steal it, Chloe," he warned me, his voice a fierce whisper in the quiet bedroom. "They will try to bully you and shame you and use the family name to force you into submission. They will lie and they will manipulate because that is all they know how to do. I am trusting you to stand your ground. Let them try to take it. Let them expose exactly who they are. But do not you ever back down. You protect this legacy. You protect yourself." I looked him in the eye and made a vow that I intended to keep with every ounce of breath in my body. I promised him I would be ready. I promised him I would not let them take a single piece of the foundation he had sacrificed his life to build. I kissed his forehead and told him he could finally rest. 2 days later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, knowing his empire was safe in my hands. I blinked, pulling myself back to the present moment. The kitchen was completely dark now, lit only by the soft glow of the streetlights filtering through the window panes. I reached out and traced the silver edge of his picture frame. He had predicted their behavior with terrifying accuracy. Jamal had not even waited a full year before trying to forge a property deed, and Yvonne had immediately weaponized the extended family to help him do it. They had walked right into the scenario Granddad Elijah mapped out. I picked up the framed photograph and carried it over to my heavy fireproof safe tucked away in the corner of my home office. I was not packing it into a cardboard box to move. I was securing it to ensure it did not get damaged during the absolute hurricane that was about to hit my front lawn. I placed the frame gently inside the steel vault next to my hard drives and emergency cache. I closed the heavy metal door, spinning the combination dial to lock it tight. The performance of my fake defeat was rapidly coming to a close. I had played the submissive sister flawlessly, giving them the exact optical illusion they craved. They had spent Tuesday and Wednesday celebrating their stolen victory, completely unaware of the legal avalanche currently speeding toward them. I walked through the dark, quiet house, checking the locks on the doors and windows. The heavy humidity outside signaled an approaching summer storm, but the real thunder was going to happen right here on my property. I went upstairs to my master bedroom and lay down on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Thursday, the day of reckoning. The moving trucks were already booked and fully paid for. My brother was preparing to march up my driveway and claim his stolen crown. I felt my heart beating with a steady, calm rhythm. I closed my eyes and let a small, satisfied smile cross my face. I had promised my grandfather I would be ready for this very moment, and I was about to deliver on that sacred promise in spectacular fashion. I drifted off to sleep, resting perfectly peacefully, while my enemies blindly prepared to dig their own graves. The heavy humidity of the Atlanta afternoon settled over the neighborhood like a thick blanket. I was sitting on my front porch holding a glass of iced sweet tea, enjoying the rhythmic creak of the wooden swing. It was late Wednesday afternoon, and my carefully constructed performance was still holding strong. The empty cardboard boxes were perfectly stacked around me, a monument to my fake surrender. I had spent the last few hours reviewing client files, but my attention was sharply diverted when a massive pickup truck turned onto my street. The loud, obnoxious rumble of the engine was unmistakable. Jamal had arrived, but he had not come alone, and he had not come to simply check on my packing progress. Brittany was sitting in the passenger seat wearing designer activewear that looked completely untouched by actual physical labor. Jamal pulled the truck directly onto the grass of the side yard, leaving deep, muddy tire tracks across the meticulously maintained lawn Granddad Elijah had loved so much. I set my glass of iced tea down on the small wicker table and stood up, walking to the edge of the porch to get a better view. Jamal jumped out of the driver's seat and walked around to the bed of the truck, pulling out a heavy sledgehammer, a crowbar, and a pair of thick leather work gloves. Brittany hopped out, holding her phone, already recording a video for her social media followers. I watched in absolute fascination as they marched right past the front of the house and headed straight for the backyard. They were not waiting for Thursday. Their entitlement was so massive, so incredibly blinding, that they actually believed they could start demolishing a property they did not even possess the keys for. I walked quietly through the house, heading to the sunroom that overlooked the expansive backyard. I stood slightly behind the sheer white curtains, completely hidden from their view, but with a perfect vantage point of the entire lawn. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera application, and hit record. The backyard was fully enclosed by a stunning 8-foot privacy fence crafted from reclaimed cedar wood. Granddad Elijah had hired a specialized local artisan to build it nearly a decade ago. It was a beautiful, sturdy piece of craftsmanship that added significant value to the estate. Brittany stood in the middle of the grass, pointing her perfectly manicured finger directly at the back section of the cedar fence. She was shouting directions at my brother, her voice shrill and demanding. She told him the fence had to come down immediately because the excavation crew for their custom swimming pool was scheduled to arrive on Friday morning. Jamal, eager to please his demanding wife and desperate to play the role of the wealthy homeowner, hoisted the sledgehammer over his shoulder. He did not check for property lines. He did not pull any city construction permits. He did not even verify if there were underground utility lines. He just swung the heavy iron hammer backward and slammed it directly into the beautiful cedar wood. The loud cracking sound of splintering wood echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I zoomed the camera lens in, capturing his face glistening with sweat as he swung the hammer a second time, completely shattering one of the main support posts. As a certified public accountant, I view the world through a lens of liability and asset valuation. While Jamal swung the crowbar, tearing down expensive wooden planks and tossing them onto the grass, he thought he was doing demolition work. I knew he was actually committing felony destruction of private property. Every single swing of that sledgehammer was adding thousands of dollars to the civil restitution suit my trust attorney was currently drafting. The fence belonged to the irrevocable federal trust. Jamal was not just destroying wood, he was actively vandalizing a federally protected asset. Brittany stood a few feet away, filming the entire destructive process on her phone. She was narrating the video, talking to her imaginary internet audience about how excited she was to upgrade this outdated property and build her dream backyard oasis. She was literally creating high-definition video evidence of their crime and broadcasting it to the public. I stood in the quiet of my sunroom recording them while they recorded themselves. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of their actions was almost breathtaking. They were so drunk on their own perceived power that basic common sense had completely abandoned them. After about an hour of exhausting manual labor, Jamal managed to tear down a massive 10-foot section of the cedar fence. He dropped the sledgehammer onto the grass, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He turned around and finally noticed me standing on the back patio. I had stepped out through the sliding glass doors, a fresh glass of iced tea in my hand, watching him pant and sweat in the heavy summer heat. Jamal puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "Hope you do not mind the noise, Chloe," he shouted across the yard, a wide, malicious grin spreading across his face. Brittany wants a pool right here, and I am making sure the ground is cleared out for the contractors. You might want to hurry up and finish packing those boxes. We are claiming our territory. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sweet tea, letting the cold liquid soothe my throat. I looked at the ruined cedar planks scattered across the lawn and then looked back at my brother. I do not mind the noise at all, Jamal. It is a beautiful day. Just make sure you stay hydrated. Brittany rolled her eyes at my response, grabbing Jamal by the arm and pulling him back toward the truck. They left the shattered wood lying on the grass, the gaping hole in the fence serving as a temporary monument to their reckless greed. I watched their truck pull out of the side yard, leaving deeper ruts in the grass before speeding away down the street. I walked back inside, locking the patio door behind me. I uploaded the new video files directly to the secure folder I shared with Elias Thorne. I typed a quick note detailing the unpermitted demolition and the estimated value of the custom cedar fence. Thorne replied less than 2 minutes later with a single thumbs-up emoji. Everything was perfectly aligned. Wednesday evening slipped into Thursday morning, bringing with it the absolute climax of this long, agonizing performance. I woke up before the sun even crested the horizon, feeling a sharp electric hum of adrenaline pulsing through my veins. Today was the day. Today was the moment the heavy curtain would finally fall on decades of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. I walked into my bathroom and took a long hot shower, letting the steam clear my mind. I took my time getting ready, choosing my outfit with the exact same strategic precision I used to audit tax returns. I did not dress in the comfortable sweatpants of a defeated woman packing up her childhood home. I wore a sharp tailored charcoal gray business suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and my favorite black leather heels. I styled my hair perfectly and applied my makeup with flawless attention to detail. I looked like a woman preparing to walk into a boardroom and orchestrate a hostile takeover because in a way that was exactly what I was doing. I walked downstairs, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the hardwood floors. The house was immaculate. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm golden glow over the pristine living room. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the rich, earthy aroma filling the space. I poured a cup and stood by the kitchen island, waiting for the final trigger. At exactly 8:00, my phone vibrated loudly against the marble countertop. I picked it up and opened the text message. It was from Jamal. The message was short, dripping with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he had already won the war. The moving truck is pulling up. Have your trash on the curb and the front door unlocked. We are not waiting around all day for you to leave. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the harsh, demanding words. I felt no fear. I felt no sadness. I felt the absolute, unshakable power of a woman who had spent her entire life being told to shrink and was finally choosing to stand at her full height. I closed the message from Jamal and opened a new text thread addressed to attorney Elias Thorne. I typed the very specific signal word we had agreed upon: showtime. I pressed send and smiled warmly to myself. The heavy grandfather clock in the hallway chimed exactly 8 times. It was Thursday morning. The air outside was already thick with the oppressive Georgia heat, but inside the house, the central air conditioning hummed with a quiet, steady perfection. I stood in the center of my immaculate kitchen, holding a fresh cup of coffee, listening to the distinct, obnoxious sound of a heavy diesel engine turning onto my quiet, tree-lined street. I did not need to look out the window to know what was coming. I could hear the loud bass of a hip-hop track vibrating through the neighborhood, shattering the peaceful morning silence. My brother had always believed that making an entrance meant making as much noise as humanly possible. I set my coffee mug down on the marble island and smoothed the lapels of my charcoal gray business suit. I walked slowly toward the front foyer, my black leather heels clicking rhythmically against the restored hardwood floors. Through the sheer white curtains covering the front windows, I watched a massive, bright orange rented moving truck jump the curb and lurch violently into my driveway. The heavy rear tires crushed the edge of a pristine flower bed my grandfather had tended for over a decade. Jamal slammed the truck into park, leaving the engine idling and the music blaring. The driver's side door swung open, and my brother stepped out onto the driveway. Jamal was wearing a brand new pair of designer sneakers and a pristine white tracksuit, looking more like a man arriving at a VIP club than someone preparing to do heavy manual labor. He threw his arms wide open, tilting his head back to stare up at the 2-story Victorian facade. He actually let out a loud, victorious cheer, clapping his hands together like a conquering king claiming his newfound kingdom. I honestly believed he had pulled off the ultimate heist. The passenger door opened and Brittany climbed out. She was wearing tight yoga pants, an oversized crop top, and her signature designer sunglasses, pushing them up into her blonde hair as she surveyed the property. She immediately pulled out her phone and began recording a video for her social media, loudly announcing to her followers that they were officially standing in the driveway of their massive new historic estate. She spun the camera around to capture the front of the house, making a point to zoom in on the tall stacks of empty cardboard boxes I had deliberately left sitting on the wraparound porch. "Look at that!" Brittany laughed loudly, her shrill voice easily carrying through the thick glass of my front windows. The squatter actually packed up her junk just like we told her to. I guess she finally realized we were not playing around. Right behind the massive moving truck, a sleek silver sedan pulled smoothly up to the curb. My mother, Yvonne, stepped out of the driver's seat. She was dressed in a vibrant yellow pantsuit, holding a large decorative houseplant wrapped in shiny gold foil. She walked up the driveway with a bright, beaming smile, radiating the absolute pride of a mother who had successfully secured her golden child's future. She walked over to Jamal and pulled him into a tight embrace, patting his back while looking up at the house with profound satisfaction. I stood motionless in the foyer, watching this spectacular display of collective delusion. It was a masterclass in unearned arrogance. Yvonne honestly believed her son had achieved greatness. Jamal believed his sloppy forgery had outsmarted a licensed financial auditor. Brittany believed her proximity to Jamal granted her the right to completely erase a Black family legacy and replace it with her own superficial aesthetic. They were feeding off each other's energy, caught in a toxic feedback loop of greed and supreme entitlement. Jamal clapped his hands together, rubbing his palms in anticipation. He walked over to the back of the moving truck and unlatched the heavy metal door, rolling it upward with a loud, clattering crash. The back of the truck was completely empty, ready to be filled with whatever imaginary furniture they planned to purchase with the equity of my home. He turned back toward the house, gesturing broadly for Yvonne and Brittany to follow him up the brick walkway. They marched up to the house like a victorious parade. Jamal took the lead, taking the porch steps two at a time, his brand new sneakers thudding heavily against the painted wood. Brittany trailed right behind him, her phone still raised, recording every single step of their triumphant invasion. Yvonne brought up the rear, holding her decorative plant, murmuring loudly about how wonderful the porch would look once they cleared away all of my depressing clutter. I watched them navigate around the tall towers of empty cardboard boxes I had meticulously taped together. Jamal kicked the bottom of one box with the toe of his sneaker, testing its weight. When the empty box shifted easily, his grin widened even further. He stepped right up to the heavy oak front door, and instead of ringing the doorbell, he pounded his fist against the solid wood 3 times in rapid, aggressive succession. "Chloe," he shouted, his voice muffled but entirely audible through the thick oak. "Open the door, the moving truck is here, and we are on a tight schedule." I did not move immediately. I let him wait. I wanted the anticipation to build. I wanted them to stand out there in the rising heat, feeling the absolute peak of their false authority before I ripped the floor out from under them. Jamal pounded on the door again, this time hitting the wood with the flat of his palm. "Come on, Chloe, stop hiding. You knew this day was coming. Open the door and hand over the keys. You have until noon to get the rest of your trash off my property, or I am calling a junk removal service to throw it all in a dumpster." Brittany's voice chimed in right behind him, high-pitched and dripping with venom. "And make sure you take those hideous curtains in the dining room with you. We are having the demolition crew in here tomorrow morning, and I do not want your cheap decorations getting in the way of my contractors." My mother stepped up to the door, her voice taking on that familiar, patronizing tone she always used when she expected me to submit. "Chloe, honey, please do not make this any more difficult than it needs to be. Your brother has been very patient, giving you 4 whole days to pack your things. Be a good sister and open the door." I brought a nice housewarming plant for the entryway. Let us make this a smooth transition for the family. The sheer audacity of my mother asking for a smooth transition while standing next to a man who had committed a federal felony was breathtaking. She was attempting to use the sacred concept of family to emotionally manipulate me into handing over a $750,000 estate. She wanted me to smile and thank them for the privilege of being evicted from my own sanctuary. I reached out and placed my hand on the cool brass deadbolt. I took one final deep breath, letting the cold, clinical precision of the moment wash completely over me. I had spent 35 years playing the role of the quiet, accommodating scapegoat. I had spent my entire life shrinking my achievements, hiding my financial success, and biting my tongue so my brother could feel like a giant. That version of Chloe died the moment Jamal slapped that forged deed onto my kitchen island. I turned the heavy brass latch, the deadbolt slid back with a loud, definitive click. I grasped the handle and pulled the heavy oak door inward, swinging it wide open to reveal the bright, humid Georgia morning. Jamal stood directly on the welcome mat, his chest puffed out, his arms crossed over his pristine white tracksuit. Brittany was standing just over his right shoulder, holding her phone up, perfectly angling the camera to capture my supposedly defeated face. Yvonne stood to his left, holding her potted plant, wearing a soft, condescending smile. When their eyes landed on me, their expressions faltered for a fraction of a second. They had fully expected to see a woman in sweatpants surrounded by packing tape, her face red from crying, her shoulders slumped in absolute surrender. They expected to see a victim. Instead, they were staring at a woman wearing a tailored designer business suit, standing with immaculate posture and projecting the cold, ruthless authority of a corporate executive. I did not look like a woman who had just packed up her life into cardboard boxes. I looked like a woman who was fully prepared to dismantle theirs. "Well," Jamal said, quickly recovering his arrogant swagger, though his voice lacked a bit of its previous volume. "I see you decided to dress up for your moving day. Hand over the keys, Chloe. The truck is running and Brittany wants to start ripping up the carpets in the guest bedrooms. Let us get this over with." "Get your boxes off the porch, too," Brittany snapped, lowering her phone slightly to glare at me. "I told you on Sunday not to leave a mess. You need to drag this trash down to the curb right now. My interior designer is coming back at noon, and I will not have her stepping over your garbage." I stood perfectly still, letting their demands hang in the heavy air. I looked at Jamal's arrogant smirk. I looked at Brittany's entitled glare. I looked at Yvonne's expecting maternal gaze. They were all standing on my porch, breathing my air, standing on property that legally belonged to a federally protected trust I controlled. I smiled. It was not a warm smile, and it was certainly not a submissive one. It was a sharp, terrifying display of absolute confidence. "I am not handing you any keys, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous calm. "And those boxes on the porch are completely empty. I have not packed a single item. I am not moving out of this house today, tomorrow, or ever." Jamal's face twisted into a mask of pure aggressive fury. He took a threatening step forward, raising his hand to point a finger directly in my face. "Listen to me very carefully, you crazy witch," he snarled. "I have the signed deed. This is my house. You are leaving today even if I have to drag you out by your hair." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply held his furious gaze and waited, because I knew exactly what was standing right behind the heavy wooden door frame, directly out of their line of sight, waiting for my absolute cue. "You do not own this house, Jamal," I said, my voice ringing with crystal clear authority. "You never did." He opened his mouth to scream at me, to assert his dominance one final time, but the words never made it past his lips. I took a deliberate step backward, pulling the heavy front door open, entirely wiping the smug, confident smiles right off their faces. I pulled the heavy oak door wide open all the way, stepping back into the grand foyer. I was not standing alone. Standing directly behind me, stepping forward into the morning light, was Elias Thorne. He was a towering African-American man in his late 50s, wearing a bespoke navy blue suit that screamed expensive billable hours. He held a thick leather-bound portfolio under his left arm. Flanking him on either side were two fully uniformed Fulton County Sheriff deputies. Their hands rested casually on their utility belts, their expressions carved from solid stone. The sheer visual impact of two armed law enforcement officers and a high-powered attorney standing inside my house hit my family like a physical shockwave. The aggressive momentum Jamal had carried up the porch steps evaporated in an instant. He froze, his brand-new sneakers completely glued to the welcome mat. Brittany lowered her phone, her mouth falling open as her recording captured the sudden presence of law enforcement. The smug narration she had been delivering just seconds ago died in her throat. My mother, Yvonne, let out a sharp gasp, clutching her decorative houseplant against her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the reality unfolding in front of her. They had expected me to be a weeping victim, begging for a few more hours to pack my bags. They had never anticipated walking into a heavily fortified legal blockade. Jamal was the first to break the stunned silence. His fragile ego simply could not process the fact that he was losing control of the narrative. He puffed his chest back out, trying to project a dominance he absolutely did not possess. He stepped over the threshold, shoving his hand into his tracksuit pocket and pulling out the folded quitclaim deed. He aggressively thrust the paper toward the older of the two deputies. "Look, officer," Jamal barked, his voice laced with unearned entitlement. "I do not know why my sister called you here, but this is a simple civil dispute. She is just mad because our grandfather left this historic house to me. I have the signed property deed right here. I am the legal owner, and I gave her a lawful eviction notice on Sunday. You need to escort her off my property so my wife and I can start moving our furniture inside. The older deputy did not even flinch. He did not reach out to take the piece of paper from Jamal's hand. He simply maintained his stoic posture and looked directly at Elias Thorne. Attorney Thorne stepped forward, his leather shoes making a sharp sound against the floorboards. He looked at the piece of paper Jamal was violently waving around, and a cold, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. Thorne reached out and gracefully took the folded document from my brother, grasping it between his fingers as if it were a contaminated piece of trash. He unfolded it slowly and deliberately, maximizing the agonizing tension radiating across the front porch. He adjusted his expensive glasses and read the messy forged signature at the bottom of the page. He let out a low, humorless chuckle that sent a visible shiver down my mother's spine. Yvonne knew what expensive lawyers sounded like, and she knew that specific tone meant someone was about to lose absolutely everything. "This is a truly fascinating document," Jamal Attorney Thorne said, his voice smooth and deadly quiet. "It is fascinating because it purports to transfer the title of this massive estate from your late grandfather directly to you. It is dated just last month." Jamal smirked, crossing his arms over his chest, completely oblivious to the massive trap he was standing in. "Exactly," Jamal sneered. "It is a legally binding contract. My grandfather signed it before he died. The house belongs to me now. Tell my sister to grab her garbage off the porch and get out of my way." Thorne slowly shook his head, opening his thick leather portfolio. "Actually, Jamal, this document is legally impossible," Attorney Thorne stated, projecting his voice so every word echoed clearly across the quiet suburban street. "You see, your grandfather did not own this house last month. In fact, Elijah has not owned this piece of property for over 6 months." The silence that followed those words was absolute. The heavy bass thumping from the rented moving truck in the driveway suddenly felt very distant. Brittany took a slow, nervous step backward, her designer sneakers squeaking slightly against the painted wood of the porch. Yvonne's eyes darted frantically back and forth between the attorney and her golden son, her maternal instincts finally registering that Jamal had marched them straight into a devastating catastrophe. "What are you talking about?" Jamal stammered, his confident posture cracking instantly. His arms dropped to his sides and he looked at me with wild, desperate confusion. "That is his house. His name was on the county records. I checked them myself before I brought the paperwork over here." Thorne pulled a thick stack of documents from his leather portfolio, holding them up for Jamal to see. The pages were adorned with federal tax identification numbers, state seals, and signatures of multiple witnesses. "Your grandfather was a highly intelligent man," Jamal Thorne explained with ruthless precision. He knew exactly what would happen to his legacy the moment he passed away. He foresaw this exact pathetic attempt at a property grab. So 6 months before his passing, under my direct legal counsel, he transferred the title of this historic home, his investment portfolios, and all his liquid cash accounts into an irrevocable federal trust. Thorne took a step closer to my brother, towering over him both physically and intellectually. He legally transferred ownership of the entire estate to the trust. He removed his personal name from the property completely. When he passed away, he owned absolutely nothing. Therefore, he could not have possibly signed a quitclaim deed transferring this house to you last month. You forged the signature of a deceased man on a legal document for a property he did not even legally possess. Jamal's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He looked at the trust documents in Thorne's hand and then looked back at the forged deed. The horrific realization of his own spectacular stupidity was visibly washing over his face. He had not just committed a crime, he had committed an impossibly dumb crime. He had faked a property transfer for an asset that was completely locked behind an impenetrable federal firewall. "You are lying!" Brittany suddenly shrieked, her voice pitching into a panicked, hysterical register. She pushed past Yvonne and grabbed Jamal's arm, digging her manicured fingernails into his white tracksuit. "Jamal, tell them they are lying. Tell them you own this house. We hired contractors. We scheduled the demolition crew for tomorrow morning. You promised me this house, Jamal. I am not letting her steal it from us." Attorney Thorne ignored Brittany completely, keeping his unwavering focus locked entirely on my brother. "The sole acting trustee of the irrevocable federal trust is your sister, Chloe Thorne," announced, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "She holds sole executive authority over this property. You do not own the house, Jamal. You do not own the grass you drove your truck onto. You do not own the cedar fence you illegally destroyed yesterday afternoon. You own absolutely nothing." Yvonne let out a whimpering gasp, dropping her decorative houseplant. The ceramic pot shattered against the wooden porch boards, spilling dark soil and broken roots across the welcome mat. "Chloe, please." Yvonne begged, her voice trembling with sudden desperate fear. Tell him this is a mistake. Tell the officers you invited us over here. This is just a big family misunderstanding. Jamal just got confused about the paperwork. There is no need for the police to be involved in a simple family matter. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides. I looked at my mother, seeing the absolute terror in her eyes. For 35 years, she had protected Jamal from every single consequence. She had shielded him from the fallout of every bad decision, every stolen dollar. But she could not protect him from this. I am not doing anything, Mom, I said, my voice cold and steady. I warned you on Sunday that I would not let this happen. You chose to celebrate his theft. You chose to stand on my porch and demand my surrender. Now you get to watch him face the consequences. The older deputy finally stepped forward, placing his hand firmly on his utility belt. He looked at Jamal with a grim, uncompromising expression that signaled the absolute end of the line. Jamal, you are not here because of a simple property dispute, the deputy stated, his deep voice cutting through the thick, humid air. You are here today because this forged deed is just the beginning of your problems. The older deputy stepped fully onto the welcome mat, completely ignoring the shattered pieces of Yvonne's decorative planter scattered across the painted wood. He kept his hand resting casually but firmly near his utility belt, projecting an aura of absolute unyielding authority. The Georgia heat was already oppressive, but the atmosphere on the porch had turned instantly ice cold. Jamal stood frozen, his arrogant posture deflating like a punctured tire as the deputy locked eyes with him. You are not here to evict my sister. Jamal stammered, his voice cracking, pitching into a higher register that completely betrayed his rising panic. She is the one trespassing. I gave you the deed. You saw the signature. You have to remove her so my wife and I can move in. The deputy shook his head slowly, a gesture of profound professional exhaustion. Mr. Williams, the deputy, said, his deep voice cutting through the thick morning humidity. We did not drive out here today to execute a civil eviction order. We are operating under the direct jurisdiction of the Financial Crimes Division. We are here investigating the $200,000 home equity line of credit you secured on Monday morning using that exact fraudulent document. The words hung in the air, suspended in the heavy silence of the front yard. $200,000. The sheer magnitude of the number echoed against the historic brick facade of my grandfather's house. As a certified public accountant, I knew exactly how Jamal had pulled it off. He had taken his sloppy forged quitclaim deed, marched into a secondary lending institution that specialized in rapid approvals, and leveraged a historic unencumbered property to secure a massive instant cash payout. He had used the stolen funds to rent the moving truck, hire the unpermitted demolition crew, and likely fund a lavish shopping spree for Brittany. He thought he had unlocked a limitless ATM. He never stopped to consider that bank fraud triggers an automatic federal investigation the second the genuine title holder reports the discrepancy.